the 3-lane span going westbound as well. So we need to work on that in the future, Bill, but for right now, the first two pieces is what we're working on. The eastbound 3 lanes from Moss Creek to Windmill Harbor, and then the
had to do what he did. These people will never stop trying to press their religious agenda. They really do want to destroy all the Jews, purify Islam, and come after us. And the sooner you realize that, the better. I've known that for a long time. The military operation is ahead of schedule. It's been amazing to see what our men and women in uniform can do, along with our Israeli partners. 6 of them lost, God bless them. But if you can't accept casualties, you'll never be safe, and Trump's going to see this thing through. And when this regime collapses, it's not if, it's just when. Then we can get back to the table of major peace deals, build on the Abraham Accords, get Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel. I've been working on that for years, and I'll go right back at it. That would lead to the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict as we know it. If Saudi Arabia, the keeper of the Holy Mosque, the center of Islam, would recognize the Jewish state, that would change the region unlike anything in 1,000 years. And I think that will happen when the regime collapses. We're not there yet. There are going to be some groups being armed inside the country to kind of confront the regime. We will not get on the ground in any meaningful way. This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. What happens next is up to the Iranian people. I don't believe they're out in the streets to want more Ayatollah. I think they're out in the streets to have less Ayatollah. If they ever get in charge of the country, I think we'll have a decent chance of having a friend. The Ayatollah and his crowd, there's zero chance they would ever be our friend or give up on their desire to kill us all. The new crowd, whoever that will be, I think it'll be much greater than zero. As to Israel, they've got no choice. This is the absolute fight for their existence. And I'm just telling everybody on the phone, since 1979, the Iranians have been coming after us. 1983, 220 Marines killed, 18 sailors, 3 members of the Army, and a barracks bombing in Beirut. They've got a lot of American blood on their hands. These IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan came from Iran, and they've killed and maimed a lot of Americans. So I am all with President Trump to call the question on Iran into this terrorist state. the mothership of terrorism is sinking, the Iranian regime, and the captain is dead. And let's just see this through. And once this regime collapses, the world will be safer. The Mideast will have opportunities no one's ever dreamed of, and it has to be done. You pay now or you pay later. Domestically, oil prices are going to go up, but they'll come back down. The amount of production in the world market right now is going to keep oil prices on the low side once this war is over. Inflation is trending in the right direction. The One Big Beautiful Bill tax cuts kick in about the rest of this year. So I think you're going to be able to depreciate your new investment at a faster rate. You're going to get lower rates, and this will help, add jobs and grow the economy. But this conflict in Iran, it's been in the making since 1979. For 47 years, they've been nothing but a problem, and I'm hoping and praying soon that will be behind us. So economically, I think by the end of the year, by election time, you're going to have continued economic growth, lowering of inflation, and the benefits of the tax portions of the One Big Beautiful Bill are going to start paying dividends for your businesses. So I can't wait to come home and say hey to everybody, and maybe come to the tournament, but just pray for our men and women in the uniform. They're doing something really hard, but really necessary, and pray for our friends in Israel. If you've got any questions, be glad to answer it to you.
Senator, thank you. Thank you very much. And we do have some questions from our listeners. And the first one's coming in from Marcus. And Marcus is asking you, how long do you foresee this war going on?
I think, we got, and the operations are taking a turn today, and tomorrow they're going to be much more aggressive. We decapitated the senior leadership. We're going to level 2. We're going to continue to go after the security infrastructure that torments and oppresses the people. But, I think weeks, I think a couple more weeks at this rate, we'll be in really good shape. And what happens next is up to the Iranian people. I don't believe it is, because you break it, you own it, and it may be true for a consignment shop, but not for foreign policy. The reason we did this is the threat level against us was just way too high. They were building missiles that could reach America. The proxies have got a lot of American blood on their hands. Hamas has a lot of Houthis. And, they're largest state sponsor of terrorism. They nuclear weapon capable desire, and we just had to deal with that. And if you waited another year where they get more missiles and more conventional capability, it would have been hard to take on their nuclear program. I think the Arabs are going to get involved in the next day or two, and hopefully by the end of this week, they'll have a coalition of the regional Arab partners and the United States, and Europe's going to get more involved, and it's going to be overwhelming. There's operations in Lebanon now. Hezbollah has acted up, but I'm so appreciative of our military. We're ahead of schedule, and it's not when it ends, it's how it ends. I look at it that way. It's not the date that it ends, it's how did it end. Afghanistan ended badly, right? And we want to make sure that this ends well.
Thank you, Senator. Another question is coming in from Beth, and Beth is asking, how does this impact oil for Russia and China?
It will help them in the short term. It'll be a spike in prices, but Russia's biggest nightmare is that the regime collapsed because they provided Russia all these drones. Iran's been a very big weapon supplier to the Russians. A lot of these drones that are so effective are made in Iran. And at the end of the day, if you can take the regime down, that's just one less bad actor to fuel the war in Ukraine and Russia. So a net loss to the Russians and the Chinese, quite frankly. The oil that is in Iran will be aligned with us. I think one of the first things you see a new government do is to come to us to help develop their oil fields, not the Chinese. We could actually be one of the economic benefits of this war is that increased production in Iran that helps America.
we know your schedule's busy. We do have two more questions that have come in, and time for those, and then we'll let you run on to your
Sure.
next meeting. All right, thank you. Beth is asking if you would speculate on who you might speculate would fill the Iranian leadership gap.
I think the people are in the process. There are different groups forming. It's not as tribal as other Mideastern countries, so it won't be as complicated. You got the former crown prince, oldest son of the Shah. He's out trying to work a transition plan. But I told the president, listen, we're breaking the threats to America. They will no longer, after this is over, be able to hit our homeland. They're going to be out of the nuclear business, and their support for terrorist groups is going to be way down, and that makes us safer. As to what happens next, kind of let the Iranian people figure that out. When we get involved and start doing everything, people just don't take ownership of their own lives. And I don't want that to happen again in Iraq, Afghanistan. We got so involved that people on the ground just kind of deferred to us. I told the president, give the people a chance, and here's what I would say. There's zero chance the Ayatollah would ever be our friend. The people coming, I think it goes well beyond zero. And look at it this way. Do you think these people are getting killed out in the streets to want more Ayatollah? I don't. So I'm optimistic that when the regime collapses, it'll be messy, but over time we'll have somebody we can do business with better than the Ayatollah.
All right, sir. Last question we have, or at least the last one we have time for, is Chelsea is asking if the timing of the Iran attack had any correlation with U.S. influence over Venezuelan oil.
No. It had to do with their effort to reconstitute their nuclear program. Once we did Midnight Hammer, we really obliterated it, but they were right back at it. And they increased missile production. So instead of kind of standing down and trying to find a diplomatic solution, they were talking about a peaceful solution, and their activity was to build up their missile and nuclear capability. And that's what made Trump act, is that they were going to, they had not changed their desire to wreak havoc on the region. And, Venezuela was one of the most amazing military operations I've ever seen. To go into the heart of a country on a major military base and snatch the leader in like 5 minutes is just hard to absorb. But what's going on in Iran is just a very incredibly aggressive air campaign to destroy the regime's capability to project power and hurt us in the future. And I think there'll come a day here when the regime's security apparatus is so weak that when people rise up, they'll have a chance to take over. Right now, they're not there, but that's coming. So Venezuela was the mothership of drugs coming into America, cocaine particularly, and narco-terrorist state. Everybody wanted Maduro out. He was an indicted guy in New York. Every Republican, every Democrat talked about how bad he was, and Trump just did something about it. These drug cartels are poisoning America, killing more Americans than any other form of terrorism. And they're on the run now. President Trump has put Venezuela out of the drug business. Cuba will fall here soon. And it's going to be an amazing transformation in our backyard. Not only have we secured our border, but we're shutting down the supply of drugs, cocaine and fentanyl, coming from our backyard. And that will make us safer. And a lot of people on this phone probably know somebody who's had a fentanyl or drug problem, and it'd be nice to deal with drug traffickers in our backyard. So Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, if he can pull this off, it'd be the most historic thing since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I've been with him at every step. I spent a lot of time with him. I just got back from the region 2 weeks ago, making sure everybody's ready to go. You need partners when you start these things, and I'm hoping the Arabs will jump in here in the next day or two. And we got a chance we've never had since 1979. The Iranian economy is in shambles. He's put tariffs on anybody who buys Iranian oil. The military has really been hurt from all these operations by the United States and Israel, and the people are basically ready to topple the regime. Those three things have never happened together since 1979, and this is the moment. Pray that we get it right, and I feel very good about it. And back here at home, I think you're going to have a growing economy, the cutting regulations, keeping taxes low. It's all going to pay dividends here, and hopefully we'll have energy costs go down after the war. But the chamber, y'all are the heart and soul of the community down there. You're competitors in the business space, but you work together to make the community special, and that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm trying to work with Democrats to help build on the Abraham Accords when Iran collapses. So pray for our folks in harm's way, and I will see you soon, and I'll try to get my golf clubs out.
Senator, thank you very, very much for your time today. Very kind of you, and we hope to see you at the RBC Heritage very, very soon.
All right, be safe, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. He talked a little bit about the economy, and appropriately, we're going to turn now to our research economist, Dr. Joey Van Essen, with the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Van Essen consistently helps us translate what's happening globally, statewide, into what it means here locally. With instability overseas and financial markets reacting in real time, we're especially interested in how global events could ripple through South Carolina's economy. Dr. Van Essen, welcome back. We're glad you're with us this morning, and we're very, very excited to hear your take on what's going on.
Well, good morning, Bill, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And I know we have a lot on the agenda, so we'll just jump right in, taking a look at South Carolina's economic outlook for 2026, where we are and where we are likely headed in the coming months. And really, when we're trying to get our arms around where South Carolina's economy is, we can start with the dominant theme that has emerged over the last 12 to 18 months, this theme of pervasive economic uncertainty that has been with us for a period of time and has extended into 2026. I think all of us resonate with that theme of uncertainty to a certain extent. And it's come about from multiple forms, two primary ways that we see this. One is business uncertainty, and the other is consumer uncertainty. And on the business side, uncertainty has emerged over the last year because of the back and forth on trade policy and new tariffs that have been implemented. And of course, those tariff discussions have moved into 2026 as well. And one of the practical implications of that is that we have seen businesses, in some cases, go into wait and see mode, meaning that even though we're continuing to see stable demand overall and business production has remained relatively stable, businesses have been less likely to invest and hire and make major decisions about looking towards the future, simply because they are more uncertain about where prices are headed, what supply chains are going to look like, what the market environment is going to be. So we have seen business uncertainty lead to that wait and see mode across many sectors. And then secondly, consumer uncertainty is also relatively high, and that's coming from affordability concerns and rising prices and some of the lingering effects of inflation that we've seen over the last several years. And I want to take just a quick moment to talk a little bit more about consumer uncertainty, because consumers, remember, drive the bulk of our economy. About 70% of our economy comes from consumer spending, 70% of GDP. So it's important to understand what consumers are thinking, what they are doing, and what motivates them to either increase or decrease their levels of spending activity. And the bottom line is that when we look at consumer activity and what they care about, it comes down to three things: job security, wages, and prices. Certainly nothing that would surprise any of us. The three things that are of most pressing concern: will you have a job next year? Are you going to get a raise at work? And what are prices doing around you? Are price changes making things more or less affordable? And so we can really measure these three factors by looking at trends in what we call real wage growth. And real wage growth is just looking at the difference over time between the growth in wages that we see and the growth in prices. And ideally, what we would like to see is a situation where wages are consistently growing faster than prices. Because as you can see here, if you get, for example, a 3% raise at work, but everything around you goes up by 3% in terms of how much it costs at the store, then you're not actually any better off, right? And you could be worse off if your wages go up by 3% and prices rise by, say, 5%. So we have to look at that difference between the growth in wages and the growth in prices, or what we call real wage growth. And so if we track that over time, you can actually see what real wage growth has been doing going all the way back to May of 2020, right in the midst of or at the beginning of the pandemic. And you can see a major decline in real wage growth up through 2022 when inflation peaked and we saw prices rising faster than wages. But since 2022, we've begun to see consumers really claw back that lost purchasing power because wages are now growing faster than prices again. But having said that, we have not yet gotten back to that level that we were at in May of 2020. So in other words, when we look overall over the last 5 years or so, consumers are still worse off from a purchasing power perspective than they were in May of 2020. We haven't clawed back all that lost purchasing power, but we're moving in the right direction and we're on track to get there basically about a year from now, about the summer of 2020, 2027. So you can see the rapid decline in real wage growth, the rapid loss in purchasing power, and the fact that we're recovering it, but it's just taking quite a bit of time, which is what we would expect. There's certainly nothing unusual about that. But the net result is that consumers continue to be cranky, is the term that I use. And I think it's an accurate description because if we look at consumer sentiment, it remains at historic lows. You can see that's extended into 2026, where we circled on the right-hand side of the screen there. But it's not just about what's been happening in recent months. Notice that consumer sentiment has been consistently below pre-pandemic norms over the last 5 years or so. And that is largely due to the fact that consumers have lost purchasing power. And even though they are recovering it, we're seeing steady movement in a positive direction because on average, consumers are still worse off from a purchasing power perspective than they were in 2020. Consumer sentiment overall remains fairly low. But we also have to ask the question as to whether this is actually impacting the economy. How has uncertainty actually affected economic growth? Has it had a meaningful impact or not? And the bottom line is that growth has decelerated over the last year. We've seen some impacts from uncertainty, but only marginally. And that's very important. A deceleration of growth, but only marginally. So overall, the economy remains stable and in fairly good shape. And we can see this deceleration very clearly. To give you some perspective on the degree to which we've seen a pullback in economic activity, just looking at GDP growth over the last several years and comparing that to what we saw in 2025. And you can see a pullback from about 2.8% to 2.2%. So roughly a half percentage point or so in terms of the change in overall economic activity in the last year because of a lot of this uncertainty. So it's had an effect. It hasn't had zero effect, but we are still seeing stable growth overall at the U.S. level and in South Carolina. We can also see this change from a labor market perspective. And one of the other factors that we have seen and one of the new economic trends that we've seen emerge in the labor market is what we call a low hire, low fire economy. Again, another term that I think is very accurate to describe where we are, meaning that we're seeing a slowdown in hiring because many companies, being in that wait and see mode, are not looking to necessarily expand or invest in hire as much because the outlook is a bit cloudier because of the back and forth on trade policy. But they're also still seeing steady demand. So we're not seeing any type of uptick in layoff activity, so a low fire environment. And we can see that, again, very clearly in the data. And we can look at growth at the U.S. level and in South Carolina, just to give you some perspective on how South Carolina is doing far better than what we're seeing at the national level. So if you look at total employment growth over the last year, South Carolina about 1.3% compared to 0.2% for the U.S. But notice that even though South Carolina is doing better, both at the state and the national level, most of the growth has been coming from the services sector, not so much from the goods sectors. And the reason is because the goods sectors are those that have been more impacted by the uncertainty associated with international trade and price increases due to tariffs. So think about manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, logistics, retail trade. Those are the sectors that have seen a bit of a pullback over the last year. Meanwhile, the service sectors have continued to be very strong and have become the primary drivers of growth in the last 12 months or so. We also see the low layoff activity very clearly in the data. Again, a low fire economy. So this gives you a sense of what initial unemployment insurance claims have looked like. And initial unemployment insurance claims are the way that we track the number of newly laid off workers in South Carolina. So when someone is laid off from their job, they have the opportunity to file for unemployment insurance benefits. And when they do that for the first time, they are considered an initial UI claimant. And so we can just track the number of people who are filing. And so this gives you a sense here of the number of people filing over time in South Carolina in 2025 on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can just compare what 2025 looked like compared to 2017 and compared to 2001, the last 2 years where we had an unemployment rate in South Carolina of between 4 and 5%. And again, the trends are very clear here. In 2001, when we went into a recession following the bust of the dot-com bubble, that was a very different environment than what we faced in 2017, where we had a very healthy labor market. And clearly you can see here that 2025 looks a lot more like 2017 than it does 2001. So a low hire, low fire economy that is very clearly observed when we look at the data. So just briefly then, looking ahead, and then we'll go in and be happy to talk through any questions that you have, but I want to talk a little bit about what our expectations are for 2026 as we move forward. Well, first of all, if we look at the major drivers of demand, both employment and population growth, those are the primary drivers in any local region. And in South Carolina, both of those drivers are stable and remain strong as we move into the spring months. So I give that a smiley face there for both metrics, so that's good news. We've seen employment growth already, again, a tapering over the last year, so a bit of a slowdown, but as we've seen, South Carolina is doing far better than what we're seeing at the national level in terms of overall growth rates. And our population demand continues to be very strong. You may have seen recently that the U.S. Census Bureau just released the latest data for 2025, which you can see here. South Carolina ranks #1 in the country in terms of our population growth rate, and we have been consistently in the top 5 going all the way back to 2020. So South Carolina continues to do well, and every projection in terms of population trends for the U.S. clearly shows that over the next several decades, the southeastern United States is going to see more population gains than any other region of the country. So again, from a purely demand perspective, that's very good news for South Carolina. We'll continue to see population growth, and our steady employment growth means that demand is likely to be fairly steady going forward. And so if we look at most measures, the U.S. consumer and U.S. business activity do remain stable in 2026, but there isn't much wiggle room for further cooling. That's the key takeaway. We don't really have a lot of extra wiggle room to absorb a major economic shock, because as we've talked about, we've already seen a bit of a pullback in activity, and the labor market, while stable, we still see very slow in employment growth. So stability in terms of where we are now, but not a whole lot of wiggle room for further cooling. And so as we wrap up, I want to make a brief comment about the Fed and just talk a little bit about interest rate policy in terms of what this means for 2026, given that we've seen a slower labor market and given that we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room for further cooling. So remember that the Fed has a dual mandate. They are looking both to maximize employment and to minimize inflation, right? They're trying to juggle both of those goals simultaneously. And what you see here is the basic picture that the Fed sees when they're looking at the employment situation. This looks at monthly job gains. In this case, we're looking back to 2023. And the black lines there
mention our conversation and cocktails 19th at Tanger 1. So mark your calendars for that. And then our Young Professionals program is really taken off. And that group will be meeting on March the 25th, 5:30 at Shelter Cove. So a couple of big events, and I just would be remiss if I didn't mention our Jobs Now 2026 Expo from 9 to 4 on March the 26th at the Culinary Institute of the South. So that some of the events that we have. Our next Power Hour is going to be on April the 1st. So you want to mark your calendar April the 1st. And then the RBC Heritage is right around the corner. And our Plaid Party will be on April the 2nd in Sea Pines. Plaid Party is always a big party. So, all right, I see if we have Jim with us now and talk a little bit about the wonderful St. Patrick's Day Parade here on Hilton Head Island. And I believe that the parade was the first in South Carolina, as well as continues to be the oldest. And Jim's going to start his video, and then we'll be ready to go here. Appreciate you sticking with us while we do that. It's always a lot of connectivity, and well worth it with the great speakers that we have, and so that's most appreciative. We're most appreciative of them coming on. Well, at this time, I don't think we're going to be able to get connected with Jim, so I think we're going to have to say that's a wrap. And sorry we won't get to hear from him, but you can look forward to the parade. I know you are.